Okay. Since we're already in the middle of the 3 weeks, which of course means that more than normal, more than regular throughout the year, is the birth of Avelus for the Beis Hamikdash. So besides the regular halachos of the 3 weeks, etc., and learning about the Beis Hamikdash, as the Rebbe spoke about, I thought it would be a gedank to talk about other inyanim and halacha and minhagim that we do that are either Zecher L'churban, Zecher L'mikdash, Meheira Yibaneh Hamikdash, these ideas. Now, when it comes to Zecher L'churban, there's actually an official siman about this in Shulchan Aruch. I don't know if everyone knows, but there's such a siman. It's at the end of Hilchos Tisha B'Av, siman Tafkuf Samach. So what I would like to do for most of this year is to go through the inyanim one by one, as many as we can, and comment a bit on the discussions relating to these halachos, and that will give us a more general picture, perhaps, of this inyan in halacha. But like I said, as many as we can, we're not going to have enough time to talk about all of them. So if you look in Siman Tavkuf Samach, there are 7 halachos there. Number 1, you can't have a binyan mesuya du mechuyar, a fully, nicely decorated, finished building. You have to leave a space, an amma, across from the entrance without sid. That's number 1. Number 2, if you make a seuda, you set the table for a big meal for orchim, you have to skip something from the meal and leave an empty place where that thing would have been. Number 3, when a woman is decorating herself, adorning herself in jewelry, she has to leave one of the items of jewelry out. Number 4, when a chassan gets married, you put ashes on the forehead, the Ramah notes that some do other things. They break kois during the chuppah, or they put something else, a black mappa on the Reish HaChassan. Number 5, the gzeira not to be menagan b'klei shir, not to play music. Number 6, some kind of concept of the crowns of the chasanim, the crowns of the kalas. They're mavatal that, the outris chasanim and the outris akala. And number 7, Asr l'adam shiyamali piv s'choik b'olam hazeh. Those are the 7 halachos in Siman Tavkuf Samach. And then Tavkuf Samach Aleph, after that, has some additional halachos of kriya when you see Arei Yehuda b'churbanam, Yerushalayim, Makom Hamikdash. So we'll start with number 1 in Siman Tavkuf Samach, the Amma without sid in the house. So one could say this is perhaps one of the most notorious of these halachos. Big discussions about it. Different minhagim, different practices. So before we get into it, we'll just note what we know about this from Chabad sources. In the Igros of Rebbe Rashab Chelik Hey, we have a letter from the month of Av, Tafri Shayin Ches. It's already in Tafri Shayin involved. Rebbe Rashab ended up in Rostov due to World War I. And he was renting, whatever, they were bargaining zich a bit in Rostov. Then in Tafri Shayin Ches, Rebbe Rashab embarked on a project of getting their own place. So they bought a building, and it was throughout the year they were working on it. And then during the year there was the communist revolution, so things got a little tricky because they were nationalizing all the properties. But ultimately they continued going ahead with it. And the end of the summer they entered the new building, and that's when the Rebbe Rashab started talking about building a mikveh in the basement of that building. So there's a letter from Av, Tafri Shayin Ches. Rebbe Rashab had left Rostov, and he's writing to the Fidig Rebbe L'chayr back in Rostov, and he writes that the Ramant, which is where in Russian it means the renovations, are still continuing. And he says, I told so-and-so, the guy who's working on it, before I left, La'aniach neged Pesach HaKnisa, he uses the word in Russian, to mean the entrance, Makim Panoi Bilti Mitsuyer, I don't remember how big I told him. It's just a contract. He doesn't know the halacha. You have to tell him what you want. Shulchan Aruch, Siman Tavkuf Samach, Issa Amal Amma. So the Rebbe Rashab is writing back to Fidig Rebbe, who's closer to the construction, to follow up on implementing this thing l'maisa. I don't know beyond this makar if we have any other knowledge, information about any other Rebbeim in any other places being makbar on this pile. As we'll see a little bit, that part of the discussion is when you already get the house from someone else, what the halach is then. Maybe Maybe this is the only time that one of the Rebbeim built a house or got renovated a house. Basically.
What if you would buy it and you would do renovation, you don't have to.
No, if you're putting the sid up, then you'd be high. The question would be, if the sid is already up, do you have to now go and remove it or not? That might be more of a question, might be more of a basis to say, you know what, whatever. But here, maybe the Rosh was talking, maybe it's the only time. I don't know what happened when the Frierdiker Rebbe moved into 770, or the Rebbe moved into his house. Also, there's a story that they say when the Rebbe visited the camp, and there was a room that was locked, and the Rebbe wanted to see what was inside, and they opened it up, and they saw the room was a dump, there was paint splattered, and it was like graffiti on the wall, Zecher L'churban, like a camp joke, and the Rebbe said, Zecher L'churban? Better Zecher L'mikdash. Fine, but that's just reacting to the shtick in camp. I did find one more mucker in the Sikha of Ritzam Mayelach Tavshin Chav Zayin. The Rebbe is talking about the Rashi and the pasuk V'shav Hashem Lekecha Shvuscha, which is printed as a likud and put the Sikha Tzchelik Tes in Tzav and Aleph. So the Rebbe is talking there about the idea that Hashem himself was in Galus. And the Rebbe explains the different levels when you say that Hashem's in Galus or that you're participating in someone else's problem. And the Rebbe says there's a lower level where true you're being mishtatif, you're showing your shtatfus, your participation. It doesn't mean that you're literally in the same situation. So in R 32 asterisk in the Sikha, it gives an example that says it's also to be mishamish b'shnei ra'avin. Everyone else is starving, so it's not appropriate l'shamish. So as the Rebbe, and you look in the Makar in Sichas Kodesh, the Rebbe says, of course, you can't compare this vart of also l'shamish, whatever whatever, if it's uncomfortable or whatever, it's not the same as actually starving to death. So it's just a hishtatfus. In the Makar, in the Sichas Kodesh, the Rebbe Taka mentions another example. V'adarech zeh, darf man ibelazen ha'art v'nam alama and ashtub zecher l'churban chulu k'dei zech zum shtatf zayin l'churban. So Zecher, as das was lost Abraham, alama as a shalei be'erech seen in l'churban. It's another dogma that Rebbe apparently mentioned originally in the Sikha. It's only Sichas Kodesh is not mentioned in the Ha'ar and the Sichas, and it doesn't appear to be mentioned in Teres Menachem either, where they're mitzayin to pratim neisafim that were said originally in the Sikha, even though they don't bring the whole Sikha, they're mitzayin to go to Sichas, but this prat doesn't appear there. So this is another place where the Rebbe seems to mention it as, at least seemingly as a inyan that's halacha l'maisa. So before we get into the discussion itself, I'll point out that if you open the postscript in this siman, so you already see going back, the Pesach Tshuva right here concludes, Ach b'deiris elu yatsu lahakol, they're makel now, v'hikilu, v'chazir v'hikilu, meaning there's certain yasoidus for a kula, but they keep on making more and more kulas, ad shekamat nishkach melev, it's almost forgotten, ein al mal hishoin, and nothing really to rely on here, and other dinim like this also, the Chai Adam and the Nishmas Adam there in Kal Kuf Lamed Zayin, where it talks about these halachos, he also says, Efshar the Bisman Hazeh, the Loi Nagu B'zeh, the fact that we're not doing it now, maybe this, maybe that, but it's still Tamu, and he concludes, calls it Daichak V'tzarech Chiyun, Aman Noegen Heter. So also attesting to the fact that no one seems to be doing it. Mishnah Brura copies his language, it's in the Mishnah Brura and Tavkuf Samach, and also in Kitzur Shulchan Aruch and Kuf Chavav, Mashalei Nagu Keinata, Lo Yadanu Tam Barer. We know no one's doing it. We don't have a clear explanation as to why. So we're seeing here, they're attesting to the fact, on the one hand, that it's not really widely practiced, but on the other hand, they're expressing the fact that they don't really agree. They're not signing off on this behavior. So, Mamela, more or less, the status quo in the halachic discussion always is, generally, really, we're supposed to do it, but, different discussions about whether there are different exceptions. So to give you an idea of the discussion, so we're going to take as an example, we're going to take a tshuva of the Mishnah halachos of Menashe Klein, who personally, when I was younger, I used to daven a lot in the shul in Borough Park. I was there for some of his shiurim, so I could say I knew him a little bit. So in Shut Mishnah halachos, Chelek Hey Siman Ayin Aleph, so there's a tshuva on this topic of Abayna bias, from tshuva from Tavshin Chavav to Rabbi Shalom Zecher L'churban Reuben Halberstam of Tzeshenov. Was you see his name a lot in the Shalos and Shuvas. He used to write lots of Shalos to all the Poskim and get Shuvas. So Rabbi Menashe Klein writes, I got your letter with the question of, if you're building a house, do you have to leave Amma Lama, Zecher L'churban? And part of the question was, and in this country, it's very common that you build homes, to sell, So you're the builder. Do you have to build the Amal? You have to already put the Amal in, like it says in Shulchan Aruch. And if not, does the buyer, does he have to do it? And number two, does it have to be mamish in the house? Can it be in the hallway? And also, what about the minhag of not just leaving it completely just scraped off, but instead you put black, meaning let's say the wall's white, so you have a black square on the wall. Is that okay? So Rasha Klein says you have a whole pilpul, a whole tshuva, there's no chiyuv to actually do it because they're building the house to sell it or even to rent it to others, so they're not mechuyev. And as a raya brought, he quotes from the Shalos Tshuvas Migdal Hashem Simon Samach Aleph. Now this is not the most famous Shalos Tshuvas, I would say, but it is quoted a lot in this discussion because his arguments are, as we'll see, or he made some strong arguments to be makel. Migdal Hashem was written by Shmuel Nachum. That's the Shane Gassenbayer, was a Rav in Poland, passed away in the Tafresh Yuds. The Sefer was printed in the Tafresh Mems. So in the Migdal Hashem, Shalom Yecheska Shraga Dovid Homnick is quoting that he says, if you rent an apartment, you don't have to already scrape off if the guy before you didn't leave it be'isser taka. So anyway, maybe the guy who didn't leave it, the owner, maybe also wasn't be'isser because, says the maskir, it's not for himself, he's just doing it for profit. So the maskir doesn't have to do it because he doesn't plan on living here, he's just building the house for profit, not to live in it. The Zecher doesn't have to do it because the guy before him didn't do it, and he just got the house this way. That's the Migdal Hashem's argument. And the Chalal, we let of Yidden that won't want to live in it. If there's already a Zecher L'churban, that's why the masker doesn't want to do it. And maybe he'll rent it out to a guy anyway, so it's all beheter. The fact that the masker didn't do it was already beheter. Now you got it from him. So the Cheshenover, right, and Rasha Klein said, this is talking maybe the reason why. And Batei Chsidim and Anshe Maisa in Europe, Al Piraiv, they didn't do this. Never mind that they didn't leave it. They surely didn't scrape it off afterwards. So Rasha Klein says, I don't have this say for Migdal Hashem. Of course, today you can just look it up in Hebrew books. But back then it would have been harder to find. He says, I didn't see it. I don't have it. I can't see if looking in the source will be helpful. But whatever you quoted sounds very strange. I also saw another sefer that quotes from it. And I say, the divrei hamigdal Hashem einam bnuyim k'migdal. This edifice is not such an edifice. Iboy say Gemara, Iboy say Svara. Svara is, if you build a house and you sell it or you rent it to a yid, Miman of Shach, someone is chayav here. Either the bayna is a gavra bar chiyuva, or the lekeach is a bar chiyuva. Why? How are you somehow saying that between the two of them, no one has to do it? Okay, maybe we'll get back to that. But we're talking about in situations. Let's start with situations where it's pretty clear. You're building, building a building. You're planning on you want to sell it to you. So between the two of you, someone should be chayav. And if you look in the Gemara and the postscript, it seems like the chiyuv is on the bias when it's built by a yid. And as long as it's built by a yid, you have to make a zecher. And there's no mention before the Migdal Hashem of what the reason why you're building it is. And just like a guy, when a guy builds it, it's automatically potter, and it doesn't matter whether he built it as an apartment or whether he built it to sell. So the reverse should be true for Yid. So he says, that's just basic, very simple. And he says, anyway, even if you're renting it out, you're not selling it. It's pasha that you're chayiv to make a zecher. Never mind if you hold that schirus leikanya. So the person that's renting it, whatever, he's occupying the house, but there's no kinyan here in the guf bias. So you're just being seicher, you're just renting the tashmish habayis. The Gemara says there's a mecher involved in a schir. That's fine. The mecher is on the tashmish habayis, not on the house itself. So if you say that, so male the seicher was never kainet. So male the maskir always owns the house. It's always the maskir's house. So he's always chayev. It doesn't matter what's going on there. Someone's moving in, out. There's no effect on anything. He owns the house. And even if you hold out the Zecher, Taka does have a kinyan in the Guf HaBayis. So the Zecher is mechoyev. Now the house is his. Okay. And it was done by Isser, right? The fact that wasn't taken off yet, it was not the right thing, it was the wrong thing. So you still have to you have to scrape it off and make a Zecher L'churban. So again, between the masker and the Zecher, someone's got to be responsible for it. But there's no way that it just vanishes between the two of them. There's a Gemara, so the marker for this is in the Gemara, postscript of Samach. So it says there that if you buy the Chatzar and it's already fully done, this lashon is actually mentioned in Shulchan Aruch as well. But once it falls, you don't have to rebuild it the way it was before, and now you have to put in the Amal. So the question is, what does it mean? Well, what do you mean? Why should I assume if I bought it already, it's fine? So Taisva says, we're talking about back then, that you should assume that it was built before the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed. That's why it's beheter. The Magen Avraham says, we can give another reason. We can say that Mistama, a guy made it and a Yid bought it, so that's Harezu B'Chizkas. Once you rebuild it, now a Yid built it. And the Bach says that we don't say Harezu B'Chizkas Ataka, because why would you assume the house is from before the Beis Hamikdash? That's not practical. Unless we explain Taka like the Magen Avraham that you got it from a guy. And Eliyad Abba says, to say, maybe you got it from a guy. We never found this chiluk before. The main pshat in the in the Gemara Taka is that it's from before the Beis HaMikdash. So this sentence has no relevance. There's no bias from before the Beis HaMikdash. So Rashi Klein says, if it was true that if you build Almanas Limkar or Almanas Liskar, you also don't have the Chiyuv. So then why didn't everyone teach that into the Gemara? That is one of the very common scenarios in which someone builds something, Limkar or Liskar, and that's why he wasn't Mechayev to put it in. You got it from that. So that would be the place to mention the Svara. And so from the fact that they keep on talking about either Beis HaMikdash or a guy, so it seems like this is taka not the heter that exists until the Migdal Hashem came up with it. And he says also, what's mat pshitale, that you might sell it maybe to a yid, maybe to a guy. So he says, to me that's not clear. We explained already the issues on the binyan. If the binyan is a Yisrael, even if he's selling it to a guy, he should have done it right away. So it would still count be'isr. And in fact, the Meheira Yibaneh Rabbi Yaakov writes in Meheira Yibaneh on the Torah and Tafkuf Samach, he writes personally a story that happened with him. He bought a house from a guy. The guy had lived in the house for a number of years, and still, when Rabbi Yaakov moved in, he taka was Mekayim the halacha. He scraped off an amal because he knew that the house was taka originally built by a yid. So Rabbi Yaakov, as far as Rabbi Yaakov knew, you follow who the original. Doesn't matter if the yid's, maybe sold it directly to the guy, but it's the yids, originally the yids. And he says, mention another svara that there are a lot of yidden that don't want to move into the house if it's going to be a Zecher L'churban. So the masker is only doing it, he wants to be able to do business. That's why he's doing it. Tmehani pekadosh yemar zeh ishtaka hadover for revach moment. You can just override an issa derabanan. Since how does that work? Because for example, you have a tshuva of the Radbaz, that if you're among goyim and you can't find kosher food, so the question was, how much money do you have to spend to get kosher food? So the Radbaz says, mechuyev litin kol mamoina. You have to spend all your money till you run out of money to keep eating kosher, even if it's just isun and derabanan. Nash Klein says there's also a Chavis Yar about this. You look at the Chavis Yar says he was asked that people were mocking someone, good food. They said, this guy is a piker be'isr yayin esach. What happened? A Baal Muhammad, some kind of soldier, passed through, and the guy demanded that he drink together with him, and the drink was yayin esach. He's going to cut off his ear. That was the threat. And the guy went along with it, and everyone's berating him, he drank yayin esach, he doesn't hold the yayin esach. So the Chavis Yara says, look, if it was just a threat, an empty threat, then you shouldn't just jump and, listen. But if you felt taka, you felt concerned, you thought it was a threat he might carry out, then ein lechet, and he gets into that and why even an ear, you can't part with you don't have to part with your ear for something like that. Then he adds, but if you could have paid him off, if you could have responded by saying, well, I'll pay you money, I'll give you whatever you want, don't force me to do this. And he didn't do that, because he didn't mention money, then the Chavis Yara says, chashishani le mechatos. He needs at least a tshuva kala. And Chavis Yara says, I heard from a god that said that you're only have to save yourself with money. If the guy says, give me money or do this avera, then you have to give the money, and then you don't have a heter to say, okay, well, let me not give the money, and then the guy is going to start physically threatening me, and then I'll say, ultimately the reason why I did the Avera was because he was physically threatening me. But the fact is, you could have used your money to stave that off. So you have to give the money, but that Gadol said, and if the guy is just trying to force you, that you don't have to mention money, you can just say no, and if he goes straight to threatening you, then you don't have to mention money, you're allowed to listen. But Chavis here says, I disagree. It's also also, you have to proactively spend all your money, not to be over, even if you never end up in a situation of a sakana. So Rosh Klein is quoting that, so then if this is the case, so then renting a house, you're afraid, customer, since when is that a basis to override Isser D'Rabbanan? So even an Isser B'Sheva Al Tasa, and you're going to him an Isser, because now the Koiner really has to scrape it off, and he's not going to scrape it off. And Adrabah, if you think there are Yidden that are not going to want it or not going to do it, then don't rent to them. So Mamela, that can't be the reason why Chassid and Anshe Ma'aser in Europe didn't do it. Because they were all renting. That was the svara. No, they were all renting, so that's how it worked out. So no, now lo yasi shaper. That's not an explanation. And in fact, we see in Zecher L'churban, he brings someone who writes that if you live in a guy's house, if they redo the sid every year, then the next time they do it, you're already living there. You should scrape it off. So Mamela, big Shem is tzarchi and gadol. Then Rashi Klein says we can be malamed schos in another way, because from the Gemara and other Mekhairas it sounds like that if there's other things mixed into the sid, teven, choil, straw, sand, it's fine. So Rashi Klein says you have to check what the Metzias is nowadays in reality, but Rashi Klein says because all our houses it's all a mixture and no one's using pure sid, so maybe that's the reason. To be malamed schos and those who aren't mekayim, but for Ames, you should make a Zecher L'churban, because that's what I saw my father. He says Hashem Yikim Domei do. Is we know that in Tzanz, of course, one of the big rabbis and poskim in their world. So a guy in a Kaddish of Tzanz, he writes the story of Bekitzer. The story is brought in a number of places. That there was someone by the name of Hill of Kolamai. He was known to be a Gresa Musarzager and Kanoi. So he visited the Mechaim of Tzanz, and Mechaim of Tzanz said, "No, you tell everyone Musar. Maybe you have something to tell me. Can you come up with something for me?" So Rabbi Kalamai said immediately, "Where's the Alma? I don't see it." So Chaim said, "Okay, fine." He got up and he started scraping off the wall. That's the story of Menashe Chaim brings here the kids. And Menashe says, "Gamani hakotten, Menashe hakotten." I myself have an Alma in my house, even though I'm not even sure I really need to do it because I taka bought it from a guy, and maybe taka it's b'chaskosai, but b'komakim yois toiv. If it's a new house built by a Yiddish builder, Pashat you're mechuyev, unless you're going to say the other reason that there's other stuff mixed in. So again, the question of the room versus the hallway, the Iker is taka, the Pesach Habayis. Some even say really every room. Fine, okay, Yaakov Emden in different places already said we don't do it in every room, even those who do it. It's the main room, the first room.
Or would we connect that by a Pesach?
Okay, there's also discussion. We're not getting into the practical applications of exactly how I want to do it. If you want to be Mekayim in this Indian, you can look in this farm or ask her. And what about the shaila of putting black? So even though the Shalom and the Lavush, Prophet Magen Avraham say, we're not so sure about this, but the Eliyad Abba quotes from the Aguda from the late Rishonim in Germany that said, Taka, either you leave it below Tzir Sid, or you mad a Shacher. So, okay, there's a market for it. And anyway, it's just the Chumrah because it's the Limud Schos of the Chayil and the Tavan. So that's where Menashe Klein he's willing to accept that. That's acceptable. So that's how we can. Of course, there are many other discussions and details, but that's just to give you a sense of the general spirit of the discussion. Number 2, making a meal for guests. Right. So there's 2 details. You're supposed to skip a dish and leave an empty space. So there's a sefer that's Malakat. The sefer basically focuses on this simon, on these halachos. It's called Pninas Hamikdash. So I'm going to rely here and select from some of the Mekhairas that he quotes. So first of all, you have the Mekhairas that say that no one's doing it. The Shiur in Mekhar Chaim writes that Emashkichen leis ato b'zeh, although he writes Yesh la'achmer. Yaakov Emden writes in his Siddur, Aha, miyom elei shamati v'lei ne'isi, misha som lev lazeh, v'miyat hashkacha al divrei Chazal. Chayadam writes, Tzarechim shekol ze'ei noeg in klal, which is then quoted into the Mishnah Brura. One of the Meheira that talks about it, the Zecher L'churban, is Dvar Yeshua Arenberg. I don't know if he's still with us or he lived there not too long ago. So he writes, he has old Shiur about Amal Amma, and then he has like one sif in the middle where he says, and by the way, whatever explanations we're given here doesn't explain what about the other takana, the shulchan. No one's being nizer, no one's being lamitzchos. So he's wondering if anyone has anything to say about it. So the explanation that some said, the Kaf HaChaim. Kaf HaChaim says that it could be that back then there was a very specific routine and sequence of things that you did out of formal Suda. And when you had that information, so then if you skipped something, it was notable. Okay, you skipped this step of the meal. That's Zecher L'churban. And today, there's no Seder at all. Everyone just serves whatever they have. So you go to someone's house and they don't serve this salad. You think, they left it out because Zecher L'churban. They weren't planning on serving it. You have no idea. There's no significance. The way meals are run today. And Aruch HaShulchan also seems to hint at this. What does it mean? And other Meheira that also seem to be saying this concept, this idea. And right today, there's no. This is fakert. Before every meal, let's say you're having catering, you have to go to the caterer before and tell them what you do want to serve. There's no expectation of a particular thing being served. Kaf HaChaim concludes though and says that you should still better to leave a makim panui, meaning you can't be mekayim the skipping part, because what are you skipping? But if you could at least leave an empty plate or something, that would be easy to do. So I don't know who does it, but that's what the Kaf HaChaim says to do. Meheira that in this Indian there's something similar mentioned Taka Meferish and Alter Rebbe in Shulchan Aruch and Hilchos Pesach. That Avelei Zion b'chol hashana toiv l'mayit b'kelim noim Zecher L'churban, says it's clearly in Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch. But well, Pesach, let's me put all the beautiful kelim on the table. So that minhag of Pesach isn't supposed to be in contrast to the rest of the year when toiv l'mayit b'kelim noim Zecher L'churban. Number 3 is the tachshitim. A woman should skip a tachshit. So first of all, also we have the Shalah who says, that is the minhag rab b'gol samar, that they're all dressing up like the Beis Hamikdash is still with us, being over. Shulchan Devaya says no one does it. The Chayadam and all of this, he says Tzorachim. Mishnah copies it. Then he quotes actually from Rav Chaim Kanievsky today that they write in his name somewhere that today women usually have a lot of jewelry and they never wear all their jewelry one shot. Whenever they leave the house, whenever they dress up, they pick a selection of their jewelry. Right? Doesn't mean if a woman wore every single piece of jewelry in her house, the average regular woman would look a little funny. So, Meheira, you automatically, there was talking about a Metzias where there was a set of jewelry and you left something out here. Whenever you get dressed up, you're leaving something out. That's what they say, Bishmai. So, if that would be a limitzchos, why no one seems to be talking about it and trying to practice this, implement this, huh?
Like the off one here.
No, that's not what it was implying. So you could say also, al derech, that's the theory about the eating. Also, maybe Amal was mamash a seder mesuyim. It was a specific set. Yeah, this thing, wherever the Mishnah mentions in Shabbos l'mashal, the specific set. You leave out one of those. You notice that something's missing. So, as we said, part of that is the fact that today we have many more. It's all different sides of the same general idea. Birkei Yosef also is quoted as saying that b'chal on Shabbos you shouldn't make a hay. This is not talking about Shabbos, not the Suda and not the Tachshitim, because I'm supposed to do a Zecher L'churban on Shabbos. Others disagree. Then the author of the Sefer Pninas HaMikdash brings his own limud zchus. He says, Amal b'chal, women didn't typically wear their jewelry. It was only a very, very special occasion. And that was the Indian of Simcha. Primarily, you want to be Mamayit in the Simcha. But today, Nishtana Itim, and everyone has a ton of jewelry inside during the week, inside on Shabbos. So you'll almost not find a woman during the week that's not wearing jewelry. So it's already like Malbushim, and there's no special Simcha here. So the Takana doesn't apply to the Metzias as we know it today. Okay, so maybe it depends. So, and he's mitzah. B'ames, this is reminiscent of another halacha, which I then noticed he himself was mitzah to in the Ara. And Hilchos Shabbos, so really according to Din de Gemara, even up to the Rambam, B'feidish Din, a woman is not allowed to wear jewelry outside, right? Because maybe she'll take it off. Klar, basically no jewelry. The pile, the metzias of how we practice halacha changed, and there's a whole discussion on halacha. And by the way, if you look in the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, the Alter Rebbe's maskana still is that l'chatchili you should be machmer not even to wear the jewelry in the house on Shabbos, because you might walk out with it. And, step down is, okay, fine, you can wear it in the house, but definitely not outside. That's the Alter Rebbe's maskana, as late as the Alter Rebbe, even though he mentions the different limud dischos. So, I want to give a shiur about it, it's a separate discussion. But one of the svaras that comes up is that the nature of how jewelry is worn has changed over time, and nowadays, it's not such a big occasion, a big event, and the woman's not going to be so thrilled to show off her jewelry to everyone. It's been normalized. So, similar svara, similar idea. Number 4 in the Shulchan Aruch, and we don't have that much time, is the minhagim with the chasam by the chuppah. That's, of course, very famous. Now, for some reason, we don't do the minhag of the ashes on the forehead anymore. I think there are some that still do it, but many don't. Of course, much more famous is breaking the glass after the chuppah. So the source is the kolbe. The kolbe says the idea is that you put efer b'makim pe'er. That's what the Gemara says. So he said, back then, we know historically in Europe, there was a few hundred years where tefillin became very lax. People were not putting on tefillin. The Smag famously writes about it. The Rebbe quoted the Smag. So the Kolbe says, so then there's no efer tachas pe'er. There's no pe'er. So where does the efer come in? He says, so that's when it was sort of replaced by breaking the kais, which is based on a different Gemara, which is not a psak, but that story in the Gemara was turned into a minig that replaced the efer. Now, there's a tshuva about this in Yabiyah Emer, Chelik Daled, Eben Ezer, Tess, and we don't have time to get into it. One of the things he talks about is the fact that it almost became the signal for everyone to scream Mazel Tov and for the trumpet to go. So the question is that appropriate or not? So he quotes many Mekoides that say that this is terrible, this Teichama, quotes the Pri Megadim, it says already that, it became a joke, Mishpatei Uzil, etc., etc. So Rabbi Yosef says that he would suggest that you turn it into a ritual. You say on the mic, and then you break it, so then people get the point as opposed to completely missing the point. Thank you, Simon. Well, in that's no marker for it. It's something people came up with. But they do other things, of course. Many, you have a bris for Mekuravim and you announce things. So. Because then you're in the mode of explaining everything that's happening. So you end up gaining in some cases. You end up having more kavana as opposed to not realizing what you're doing. So we don't have time to talk about the other halachos in Simon Tavkov Samach. I just want to note generally that in Kovetz Teiras Nachlas Har Chabad from the week of Shoft and Tavshin Samach, there's a long shtickle there by someone by the name of Shmuel Eliezer HaKohen, who he's trying to give a general hezber, a general theory as to why he gets into the Yisoidei Ha'inyan of this, all these halachos, Rambam, Shulchan Aruch. He's trying to give a theory as to why Lefif, the Yisoidei Ha'inyan, it's taka, you don't have to be makbid on it. It makes sense why we're not makbid, not endorsing his theory, but he did write that. Now, we'll just mention briefly, there's another gather of Zecher L'mikdash. I'll mention something in lomdishe very briefly. I saw someone wrote a shtickle about it in Kovetz Oiz V'Oira. Says there's a Rabbi Yerucham that says that when it comes to things that are Zecher L'mikdash, we don't make a bracha. So for that, Rabbi Yerucham says that's the reason why we don't make a separate bracha on the Sfiras Omer of the weeks. So the days we're doing taka, the mitzvah and the Torah. That's something to do with the Omer. The weeks is only kasher to bring the Omer. We don't bring the Omer now. So the counting the weeks is just Zecher L'mikdash. He says we're not making a bracha. And other examples he gives is Kairech HaPesach and Arava of Ishana Rabbah. So the person writing this, Rabbi Shur Friedman, writes that people ask, Chayra Lulav, all 7 days of Sukkot, Kol Shiva, is also Zecher L'mikdash. We make a bracha. So he brings the Shem the Griz, a Revelvo Brisk, that there's 2 G'darim of Zecher L'mikdash. There's a gather of, that's you're not being Mekayim mitzvah. The whole thing you're doing is just going through the motions of a Zecher. And then the other gather would be that you're doing a mitzvah taka in oifen of the way they did in the Zman HaMikdash. So we would say that the Netilas Lulav is in the second gather, and that's taka mitzvah d'Rabbanan. So you make a bracha on a mitzvah d'Rabbanan. The other things are taka not being mekayim mitzvah. And he says the Baal Hamar that says about the Sfiras Omer that the Sfiras Omer is actually meant to make us sad. You write this la'agmas nafshenu l'churban habayis. That makes sense maybe for Sfiras Omer, but you can't say that about the Lulav. Lulav is the union of Simcha. So that also stems with this word that Sfiras Omer is the first gather, that's talking out a mitzvah, it's a Zecher L'mikdash L'agmas Nafshenu. And then Lulav is a mitzvah, it's a simcha in the Dugmas HaMikdash. Look there for more on this theme. Now, there's one more gather of Meheira Yibaneh Hamikdash. You look in Encyclopedia Talmudis, Zecher L'mikdash. They have the Yan under Zecher L'mikdash, the under Meheira Yibaneh Hamikdash. The Beis Mikdash is about to come back. The Rebbe in a Sicha, Tu B'Av, Chamisha B'Av, Tavshim Beis, mentions this and says that there are things you're not allowed to eat because of, Beit Shnol B'Yamtiv, things like that, where because of Meheira Yibaneh Hamikdash, the Rebbe says, Al Pi Chassidus, you understand the significance of that. Right? A person is supposed to be Meheira B'Rurim. And so we assume that if a person was going to eat whatever it is, we assume that it would have been L'Shem Shamayim, would have done a mitzvah, would have Meheira the Eichel. Afal became, we say, because Meheira Yibaneh Hamikdash, you shouldn't eat it. So you see, just using that to emphasize the power of what we're doing, L'Shem, the Beis HaMikdash, and Al Derech Zeh, to connect to me them teknom and Animal alayim, kilo humayis binyan habayis, and things like that. The connection that we have with the binyan habayis. And I'll mention one final thing for just a minute. We speak about avelos for the Beis HaMikdash Zman Hazeh. So historically, we know that about 1,000 years ago there was a movement called the Avelei Zion in Eretz Yisrael, and it was strongly identified with the Karaites, the Karaim, those who did not observe Torah Shebaal Peh. And there's a whole discussion about it in more in research as opposed to Svarim. There's a Psikta Rabasi that seems to refer to them positively. Elu Avelei Zion. There's also in Derech Eretz Rabbah, there's a positive reference to it. So that on the one hand, so you see that some, even within the rabbinic world, seem to think it was a positive thing. Then the article I'm looking at right now, has a whole theory. God is connected to the Rambam today. The Rambam Perek Dal and Choshuva has the Chav Dal Dvarim Ma'akvenes HaTshuva. And the question is where this list comes from exactly. And the Rambam himself was asked where it's from, and the Rambam says, I don't really know. So his theory is that the Chav Dal Dvarim Ma'akvenes HaTshuva was a response to the Karaim, because some of the things on the list are Hachelek Al Divrei Chachamim, sounds like it's aimed at them, HaPerish Min HaTzibur, Mevaza Avaisav, Mevaza Abaisav. So according to this author, that's a better theory as to what this list was really meant to be about. And then there are others who've also, none of this is mukhrach at all, but there are those who have theorized that some of them in Hagim of the 3 weeks, there's no makar for a lot of them in the Gemara, and they speculated that some of these Menhagim may have started with the Avelei Zion in Eretz Yisrael, and that not all, even people who observe Teshuvah Peh, look at them as a totally negative thing, and that might have been the makar for some of them, but that's just mentioning that in brief. All right.
How